Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
So hi, I want to welcome our listeners back. Thanks for tuning back into the Parenting Horizons podcast. Today, we're going to do an episode about divorce and your kids and how to navigate that, which is a really big topic. Right, Julie? We got a lot of...
It's indeed a big topic. Many topics.
We have a guest today, but Julie, you wrote a book on this. Remind me, what was your book called?
My book was called Joint Custody with a Jerk. And I didn't and do not have any personal experience with that in terms of my marriage. I've been married for 40 years, although I was a child of divorce. I did have a lot of professional experience because obviously if people are coming to me to talk about their kids, we're going to have the percentage of the population who is divorced or divorcing is going to be similar to the population in the United States. So I had a co-author who did have personal experience, Judy Corcoran, and we wrote it together based on kind of best practices to keep the children out of the middle and to calm your own emotions, which are going to run high in a divorce situation, and really give techniques and practical solutions as opposed to just saying, be nice, because that's a hard thing to do. We talk about the how-tos of that.
Great.
So, yeah. And I think, Andy, that's how you found me, right?
Yeah. Let me introduce. We're lucky. So we not only have Julie, who's written a book on this, but we have a guest today. We're lucky to have a guest today, Andy Heller, and he has written a book as well. It's called Take the High Road: Compassion for Yourself and Your Family. And Andy, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the inspiration for this book that you wrote?
Sure. I come from a very different background, Greg and Julie. I'm a businessman. Some would say a successful businessman. I've run my own businesses in the past. And so I had a very challenging divorce. So even though I consider myself to be a very grounded together person, I thought, I need some help. And I got a great therapist, and she had done a really good job counseling men who were going through divorces. And the way I met Julie is, learned of Julie is during different sessions, things would come up, and my therapist would give me some books. This is a great resource for you, and that's how I got familiar with Julie. And I actually referenced her book in mine. So as I looked at different mechanisms to help me with my own divorce, Greg, I read a number of books, and I noticed that there was a gap in the divorce book space, and as I saw it. And one of my coping mechanisms when I'm stressed is I write. It just helps me relieve stress. When my mom was in hospice, I started writing notes, and half my notes became her eulogy, the other half became an article, got picked up in 5 national newspapers in the Mother's Day after she passed. So about a year or so into my divorce, I was looking at my notes and like, oh my God, I got a great outline for a book. And the basis for my book is I consider divorce to be an experiential journey. Okay. And if you go through this journey, you're going to make some mistakes and you're going to do some things good. Hopefully the goal is to do more things good than mistakes. And you learn these lessons that are valuable. The problem is the divorcee really needs these lessons on day 1, not day 107 or 305. So my book is a series of 46 of the best tips that one typically only learns experientially. And we advance them to day 1 and arm the divorcee with these tips on the first day, with a specific goal that the divorcee themselves, the divorcee's spouse, and most important, of course, the children can land at the other end as healthy as possible and move on with their lives. And even if a person picks up my book and only 8, 9, 20 of the tips apply, it's going to help them get through this sometimes very difficult process much healthier. And the intention of the book is to give the divorcee kind of a roadmap for best practices getting through a divorce.
So when you say experientially, meaning that ideally this is like if someone has your book, these are tips that in the moment they can be reading. Because when you say experientially, you mean they can only sort of learn these things in the moment as they're going through it, and the idea is that the book is there to help them navigate those moments.
Yeah, and I'll give you a great example. One of the no-nos is don't talk through your children about custodial swaps. So, Aunt Emma's coming into town, and your spouse or former spouse refuses to swap dates, so that the kids would be available to see Aunt Emma. All right, so one of the spouses tells the children, "Hey, when mom comes in, I want you to go ahead and mention that you need her to swap days, so Aunt Emma can see you." Okay, you can't ever do that. That's a double no-no. So the point there, Greg, is when you're experiencing things like this on the cuff, right, as opposed to having read about it in advance, have your plan together, and be ready when that happens, you're going to handle the situation completely different. So that's an example.
That's great. And we can we'll hop around a little bit because like this is such a broad topic, and I bring my own experience to this topic that we can talk about. And you saying that, Andy, Julie, can you speak a little bit? And Andy, you can too, because that's a big one. The don't do it through your kids and why that's a big no-no. And Julie, can you, and then maybe Andy, you too. Julie, can you speak to a little bit why? Because it seems kind of obvious, but why is it so destructive for the child in this situation to have to deal with that?
Yeah, sure. It's basic triangulation, which we always want to avoid in any relationship, whether it's a marital relationship, a parent-child relationship, or just a friendship. We don't want to speak about someone to someone else because it creates a sort of a bond between two people and leaves another out. For children in a divorce situation, it creates what we call a conflict of loyalties, and they feel torn about who should they be loyal to, literally. Should they be loyal to mommy or should they be loyal to daddy? Should they be loyal to mommy one or mommy two, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a tough position for kids to be in psychologically and emotionally. It quite literally rips them in half, figuratively. I shouldn't say literally. That's not true. It's figurative. It figuratively rips them in half.
It feels like they're being ripped in half, though.
That's exactly right, And so it also has a tendency to parentify the child and make the child into an adult. And, children deserve to be children. Children deserve to have parents, who, whether they're married or divorced, who remain the adults in the situation and talk out of hearing of the child about kind of the standards, guidelines, custodial visitation rights, whatever it is, but that the child shouldn't overhear it, shouldn't be present, shouldn't be asked about it. It's just an emotionally devastating situation for kids.
Andy, did you want to add in anything to that? The idea, I mean, like I said, that seems sort of straightforward that it's a no-no, but is there anything you want to add to why it's such a big no-no?
Unfortunately, following that answer, Julie, the answer was perfect. There isn't a whole lot to add.
Right.
The only thing that I would say on top of that is it's confusing for kids. I mean, keep in mind what we're doing when we get divorced. One of the interviewees in my book, so I interviewed lots of other divorcees and therapists and attorneys, and because I'm a businessman, so I've given the third-party view, compiling all this great advice. One of my divorcees that I interviewed, a man who landed in a very good place, he said something that's really powerful, Greg. He said, adults typically eventually land in a good place, but children never recover. And as I wrote the book, I just kept that thought and that comment in my mind the entire time. Children never get over their parents' divorce. So we have an obligation as parents to, as much as we can, lessen the impact and I go through, probably half my book is dedicated to just how to do that. But one of the most difficult things to do for a child to experience is being put in the middle of a parent disagreement. You just can't do it. Can't do it, guys.
I want to go through, you talk about a divorce structure in your book, and I just want to go through them, I guess, a little bit. You have 4 listed here, and there's one that maybe you recommend over the other: a litigated, a mediated, kitchen table, and collaborative. So I guess, litigated obviously means when you go to court, right, over custody issues, money.
Yeah, and you can have attorneys involved, but not have to end up in court. That's really, particularly if one of the parties has a much better financial knowledge than the other. It typically is helpful that both spouses have fairly competent, fairly equal legal advice. But my favorite is the kitchen table divorce, and this can be done with an attorney guiding one. It's cheaper. Okay, if you stay out of court, you're able to preserve the assets that you need when you land. Because one of the things that people don't really pay as much attention to is the financial impact. Because whatever that pot is that the family unit earns, well, expenses are pretty much going to double.
Right.
So people need to accept they rarely have the same standard of living post-divorce as they had pre-divorce. So a kitchen table divorce is far more collaborative. And even if you're in a situation with your spouse where you don't agree on a lot, if you think about it, you could sit down, and I talk about this in the book. So let's say you have a contentious situation. Mm-hmm. So you sit down, you say, look, we're not going to agree on a lot, but let's get a paper out right now. And let's put down at least how many things we can agree on, mm-hmm. and separate the things we can't agree on. So even if you end up going to the attorneys, you got your list of 50 things you're arguing about, including the Chinaware, all right? But that list is now down to 22 things that you couldn't agree on. Well, guess what? You're going to save yourself a lot of money, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to arrive at a final settlement. So what is very popular, and what we recommend, is if you can get legal counsel on both sides and have a kitchen table divorce, the attorneys, if you have good attorneys, they can guide you as to what is and is not achievable in the state or province that you're in. So you know how the law, if you're in front of a judge, what the judge would probably say, but you avoid that and you compromise wherever you can.
Julie, what do you do when it's, and Andy, you can talk about this too, when it's so emotionally charged? Because I totally agree. Ideally, that's the situation. And I also love this idea, Andy. It's like, okay, we have a lot of things we disagree on. Let's start with what we can agree on. But Julie, what about because often is like one person's much more hurt than the other. People use that as a way to get back at each other. You're so overwhelmed. You're so overcharged. So do you have some recommendations around that if that's where you find yourself in a very, very contentious, emotionally charged situation?
Well, one of the things that Andy says in his book is be generous whenever possible. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a client the other day who's going through this, and he at the end of our session, he sighed and he said, "It's really hard to be the bigger person." And I said, "Yeah, it really, really is." And being the bigger person now, when you're in the midst of the contentious divorce, is going to shorten the length of time after the divorce of the contentiousness between the two. A lot of people spend a lot of money trying to get back at their ex for whatever wrongs their ex did or whatever the wrongs they believe their ex did. And revenge is never the answer. As Andy said before, first of all, just money-wise, you're going to deplete every resource you have trying to get revenge, and then wind up with a standard of living that's maybe not even maintainable, and certainly not when kids are in tow. So as hard as it is, I think it's important to pull back and think about the long term. What what's it going to look like 10 years down the road? Not immediately, but 10 years down the road. You're not going to have to be friends with your ex. You're not going to have to be friends with their new partner. You do have to maintain, a status quo for your kids. And so it's better to take, as Andy's book, says, the high road, early on, as hard as it is.
Well, and I think, Andy, you would probably agree with this. I think that there's got to be some outside helps. I think, like, if you're struggling as a parent with the betrayal, emotionality of whatever is going on, you can seek therapy yourself. And would you say that mediation, like if you have two parents are having a really hard time agreeing on stuff, what are some of the avenues they can do outside of the legal system? Which I have some personal experience with that, so I'd like to share a little bit. But what would you say is that what a couple can do?
Yeah, there's other types of structures that I talk about, called like a collaborative divorce. Then where you bring in attorneys and you try to basically, and you have like kind of a third attorney in there who pretty much you don't leave the room without a deal. All right. So there's things you can do, Greg, that can preserve assets. One of the angles of my book is, so I'm a businessman and I bring in business skills into a divorce situation. Mm-hmm. So an example of a negotiation skill that can shorten the amount of money you spend negotiating your divorce, because typically the separation time, which is when you're negotiating your marital settlement, is the worst from a communication standpoint. Mm-hmm. That's when emotions are percolating, they're the highest, but you need to cut your deal and move on with your lives for yourselves and for your children. But when communication isn't there, you don't always know. I would say more than half of the divorcees I interviewed could not figure out what their spouse wanted in a settlement. So one of there's a sales principle that, okay, if you give a client one proposal, they're going to take your proposal and they can compare it to competition. All right. Well, who am I going to go with? Am I going to go with your company, John, or this other guy I'm talking to? Okay. That's very normal. If you give a prospective client, two proposals, well, here's a proposal using this service of my firm. Here's a proposal using a different service of my firm. Well, human nature, the mind goes, instead of comparing your company to the other company, well, tell me about the different proposals. And they're actually, so both of the choices are your company. So one of the things we talk about, if you really have such a challenging communication situation and you don't know, you got to figure out what buttons you need to push with your spouse to get a deal done. So you have your attorney, or you yourself, you draft two different offers. And you see, based on the response, where he or she is gravitating to, where their head is at, and that can help you arrive at a final deal. So, for example, one offer might have, all right, I'll take less custodial time, but I want to be paying less money. Mm-hmm. The other one is, I want more custodial time, but here's a richer offer, above the formulaic requirements. So how your spouse reacts to that can help you and your attorney figure out where you need to be to close this deal and close it fast. So there's different tools that a divorcee can use, certainly, to shorten that negotiating window and arrive at a settlement as fast and as healthy as possible and preserve as many assets. Another example is you give your spouse a richer offer if a deal can be concluded in 2 months and with attorney fees not exceeding a certain amount. So now you make your spouse kind of a partner in the need to conclude the agreement fast and preserve assets. He or she gets more money if that can be done, and that's a win-win. It's better to give your spouse, who, if he or she is helping raise your children, a bit more money than the attorneys.
Right, sure, because that's obviously just going to go to the children. It seems sort of obvious, but I think when emotions take over. Yeah, I'm sort of surprised to hear. That's so interesting that you said you interview these people and a lot of them said like they don't even know what the partner wanted. And to me, that's because you're caught up in the throwing barbs at each other that you don't get down to like, hey, what do you want? What do I want? let's try to get through this as cleanly as possible. So when you talk about something in your book called the marital separation agreement, and is that sort of like a casual, not, I shouldn't say casual, but that's something that spouses might do between each other. That's also something you can do at the beginning, even if it goes off the rails, that you're saying, hey, what do you want from this? Ideally, what do you want? I want to finish in a month. I don't want to involve the children. Is that what it is? Like you come up with a list of things between the couple?
Yeah, well, marital separation agreement is actually the legal document that's filed with the court.
Okay.
And that contains everything, your plan how to separate assets, how to parent your children. And these can be incredibly different, Greg. I mean, one of the things we talk about is within the marital separation agreement, you should also include a parenting plan. Okay, and many of these agreements have parenting components spread out, but not a specific parenting plan. Okay, I mean, you want to address things. Okay, when you have younger children, for example, you better specify now what you're going to agree to when they want to date, when they want to drive. If you come from a two-religion household, all this should be in a parenting plan. How you handle holidays. Make sure that mom gets the kids always on her birthday and Mother's Day. Father gets the kids on Father's Day and his birthday. These should go into a parenting plan that go within a marital separation agreement. How to handle business travel. If one of the spouses gets a job or has a job where he or she travels a lot, how does that affect the custodial split? So it's interesting that a lot of marital separation agreements are signed without a parenting plan. One of the things I talk about, and I believe really strongly this is you've got to have a tiebreaker mechanism that keeps you out of court, even if you are ending your divorce on amicable terms, because things might change. Okay, well, I get along with my ex today. We signed this agreement. That's fine. I don't think we need this. We're both able to get along. But guess what happens? 3 years later, he meets somebody, and all of a sudden, you're not getting along anymore. And now things that weren't a problem become difficult. And you don't have an agreement that allows you a structure that you can manage the children's lives even when things have got difficult, and now you have a new partner in the mix. So one of the examples we talk about is, two things, Greg. We talk about using a co-parent counselor, agreeing to a regular monthly or quarterly meeting with a trained parenting counselor to help the co-parents reach agreements on topics when they can't. Okay, those are really great. Okay, but it's not binding. Okay, so every now and then there'll need to be a decision, but you can't reach agreement. Then there's something called a special master. A special master is basically can be a judge, co-parent counselor that has an order that's agreed to by the spouses of what the special master can rule on. So the advantage there is that when you have that disagreement and you want somebody to come up with an answer and you cannot agree with your former partner, the special master, if it's in the order of things that he or she can rule on, say, well, both of you give me give me 10 minutes on the phone and give me your take on this, and then I'll rule.
Right.
And it keeps you out of court. So we highly recommend that.
Yeah, I think that point, and Julie, you can speak to this too. It's that, I mean, it's just listening to it. It's a lot. That's a lot to negotiate. I think it's like you said. I think it's hugely important. As it sounds like what you're saying, as much as you can to get that all down, and then you have the opportunity to revisit because obviously circumstances change and emotions and feelings can change. I mean, Julie, do you have any thoughts about that as you kind of go through that journey? I mean, I think the main thing is how much you can keep the child out of these decisions. But what about as you go along and these things come up?
Well, I mean, I think, ideally, as Andy has said, as these things come up, it's helpful to have someone who can be the tiebreaker or who can advise, who's a trusted expert who can advise the couple about, how to navigate the waters when they get troubled. In the book that I wrote, I talk a lot about when that doesn't happen, How do you, as a parent who doesn't have a special master as part of the MSA or a co-parenting counselor or whatever on board, how do you, when Susie's 15 and wants a 1 a.m. curfew, and you're like, heavens no, and your spouse is like, what the heck, who cares, right? How do you navigate that as two people in a divorce situation? And Greg, you and I have talked about the box step of communication often, which is the first step is to step back and listen to what the other person's point of view is and try to listen without judgment. Step to the side, their side, right? And say, okay, well, I'm hearing that you're advocating for a whenever curfew for the kids, and or for the kid, and I want a 9 p.m. curfew for the kids. So I hear that. Step forward and present that to make sure that you're on the right page with the other person. Say, I hear that, what you're wanting is to give, our kid, the independence that she's seeking. And I get that. And then you step back to the other side and say, which is then your side, and you say, here are kind of my thoughts about it. What if we come to a compromise? And the compromise could look like anything, right? In that particular situation, it could be, what if the kid is going to be out till, what if it's a movable feast? In other words, what if it gets decided upon time by time as opposed to a rigid curfew? What if the kid has to check in every X amount of time after 9 p.m.? What if the two of you decide that it can't be 1 a.m. or after that, but it can be, but it doesn't have to be 9 p.m. It could be 11 p.m. So, the box step of communication can help parents navigate that if they don't have a parenting counselor that they've chosen or a special master. But ideally, it's better to try to work that out ahead of time, because it's hard. The box step is a hard technique. It's not easy.
Well, and it sounds like, Andy, what you're saying is if you can do all of that work up front, even though it's very, very hard, even if you revisit it, I guess what you're saying is the more you can get that down initially, it's just going to help you down the road.
Yeah, so I think we're saying the same thing. So my book does a lot of, okay, if you're going to go down this path, this is the ideal picture that's going to make it better for you, better for your children. But like Julie said, and the way I got introduced to Julie's book, that's not always possible. Okay, and some people will look to my book, already got divorced. So one of the most talked about topics in my book is our communication challenges. Mm-hmm. Because, as Julie said, it is a really, really difficult thing. So an example of one of my tips along those lines, first of all, I love your box technique. The business tip that we use, and I speak about this in the book with high conflict individuals, is never own a suggestion. Always allow your adversary to own the suggestion. Just define the problem. So let me take this example of curfew. Hey, Julie, we got a real problem here because Johnny wants to stay out till all times at night, and I'm sure you can agree that we probably need to come together with a consensus plan. I can't really figure this out. What do you think?
Right.
So in all your communications, all you do is identify the problem and ask what he or she would suggest. Sometimes, one of the things that's very common in divorce is the parties will disagree just because my former spouse owned the idea. Yeah. So you want your spouse to own every suggestion. So let's say Julie's answer is not quite what I want, but maybe a step in the right direction. Oh, I really like this part, Julie. I still think we have a problem. And again, you state the problem. What would you suggest? The goal there is to use that mechanism to get the person closer to where you want to be, mm-hmm. just by inching them along and never telling them, don't ever show your poker. You got to play poker, guys. Don't show them your hand. Mm-hmm. Don't show what you really want for little Johnny. And mm-hmm. and very often, just because you don't offer your preference, sometimes the answer is pretty darn close to what you want because you didn't tip your hand.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. What comes to mind when you're saying that, I mean, in every episode we do on this podcast, Julie and I talk a lot about listening. And I think it's even harder in this situation, but I think that's the idea because, I mean, if you come in insisting, and especially in this maybe loaded emotional state, insisting on your point of view, insisting how you want it to go, it's not going to go well. And I think that's what you're kind of saying, that like, even if it can be difficult, like I'm kind of having a problem with this, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be very tactical with your communications, and keep your eye on the prize. You got to swallow your pride. Let your spouse offer the suggestions. I even go into there's certain no words to use in business communications that tend to produce negative responses. The word but, the word you is an inference. So I go through some sample conversations in one chapter, and I talk about it with the way we would normally talk. And then I talk about it with how you speak with a high conflict person. Okay. And it's quite different. And again, the result is you tend to get a better answer if you're very tactical with the words you choose to use. And if you allow yourself to offer the suggestions or not. Now, like, I'm not at that point with my ex-wife. We were once, okay, and it was as I started to utilize business skills that I use in business communications, it was effective. It was crazy. So and then I talked about this to therapists, and that became a big part of my book on choosing certain words to use that tend to produce more positive responses.
Yeah, I mean, Julie, you and I talk about you and but all the time, right?
Yeah, all the time. And the other thing that I'm really relating to with Andy's book and what he's saying here is something that I talk to my clients about all the time. They'll be telling me something or other, and I'll say, "What do you do for a living?" And they'll tell me, and they're generally pretty successful business people. And I say, "So if what you're talking about was a situation with a client, a multi-million-dollar client, let's say, would you be behaving this way?" And it's like, "No." And I'm like, "Okay. So you have the skills to do this. You have the skills to navigate a lot of these tough situations if you just remember that can be very business skills. We don't get our emotions involved when it's business, or we don't show our emotions when it's business. And we take that step back, and we don't use the word but, and we don't we don't vilify the other person. We don't blame the other person. We negotiate and navigate that quite well when it's a business situation as opposed to a personal situation.
Well, yeah, because like Andy said, like, how do you get success? I mean, ultimately, even in this emotionally charged state, you're trying to get success. So and this is the hardest thing to do, where you not leave emotionality out of it, but how do you function from a place that you can achieve what you want, which is the best, place for the kids. I want to talk a little bit about visitation, because I think that's the challenge, one of the biggest challenges. And I feel like I need to share. So my oldest child is technically my stepson, but he was so young when my wife and I got together. He's my son. He thinks of me as his dad, but his biological father is in the picture. And for many years, for about a decade, we were all in the same city together, and it was very, very, very challenging for a lot of different reasons. And he went back and forth. And I want to talk a little bit about court, which I think is different for everyone, but I want to give my own personal experience of it. And that when my son was about 12, his biological father started kind of angling and demanding for more visitation. And we felt, in listening to the child, that as much as he felt badly, he didn't want to do it because the back and forth is really hard. He didn't really want to add an extra day. But his biological father wouldn't take that. We tried to go to a family therapist because we knew court would be bad. We hadn't been to court yet over anything, but we knew it was not going to go well. So we continued to insist. There was a family therapist we had used a few times before when a big issue had come up that we hadn't agreed on. Myself and my wife and her ex-husband and his wife, the four of us actually went, and it was actually fairly productive. I think we did it over 2 issues. He drew a super hard line. He wouldn't go to mediation. He wouldn't go see a family therapist. He demanded that we give the day or he would take us to court. We went to court, and it was awful on a million different scenarios, incredibly expensive. Our son was at an age where he had to get his own lawyer. Horrendous. Yeah, terrible. He wanted nothing to do with it, emotionally stressful. We continued to try to force it to family therapy, wouldn't do it. So we went to court. We both had to get lawyers. Probably lasted a year. Nothing changed. At the end of the entire experience, nothing changed in the agreement, except that we both spent thousands and thousands of dollars. It's a tough one with the visitation because we understood intellectually that his biological father wanted more time, but we also didn't feel comfortable about what was going on at the house, and mostly it was the child. We kept turning it back to the child. Let's go to family therapy. Let's let the child have a voice in this. No. It's so hard. It's so difficult because one parent is usually getting the shaft, although I know, and I'm kind of saying a lot now, because I've been hearing, and maybe, Andy, you can speak to this too, that there's this new dynamic that seems to be going on with some divorced parents. If you can do this, is that the children stay in the house and actually the parent leaves maybe for a week. Because that's my biggest takeaway when I look back on this experience is the instability of the back and forth was so challenging. And his biological father moved away when he was 12. And as much as that had its own complications, the stability of our son finally living in one house literally changed him overnight. And so I know I just said a lot. So I guess Andy and then maybe Julie, you can speak to this. How do you navigate that visitation piece that can be I left this, I forgot this. They wake up. I mean, my son used to talk about waking up in one of the houses and not knowing where he was. But what are you going to do? Your parents are divorced and they both need to see you. So Andy, can you take something out of that for us?
Oh, yeah. I've got a couple great bullet point comments of what you said. The first thing you sort of suggested that it wasn't a good situation in his home. So that to me, that's a very, very different situation. If your child is, if something about, if there's a dependency issue in the other house or an abusive situation, or they're being exposed to something that's not in their best interest, that changes everything, guys. Okay, so you got so keeping your children in a home that's a more stable home, that is paramount. So let's assume, though, for the sake of this discussion, both homes are stable. Okay. One of the things, and I also speak about this in the book, is it's very difficult for a parent who comes in and out of their lives. All right. So that parent who all of a sudden says, I want more visitation, the inference I take from that, Greg, is at one point he didn't have that. So kids respond very, very well to structure. Okay. And the fewer changes involved, the less difficult this becomes. So some families I interviewed had what's called a 5-5-2 custodial structure. Some had week on, week off, and they had this for years. And the longer they have this, the easier it is for the children. And in terms of back and forth stuff, the children should have optimally a set of clothes, a set of entertainment, and that are similar, a bicycle in both homes. So the need to bring a bunch of stuff back and forth is minimized. What is more difficult for the children is the sudden request for more visitation, the sudden request for less visitation once the children have got into a comfort zone. So I'm not particularly in favor of that. The children need stability. And the last place you want to go, I mean, your situation just makes me cringe at thinking about what that poor boy at 12 years old had to have an attorney. Right. You don't want that. And the parents have to understand that they can have their disagreement, but the cost of their disagreement is far too significant that if a child needs an attorney, you need to figure out a different way to reach an agreement.
And you said it at the beginning of the conversation. I think this is a trauma that kids will deal with for a long time regardless. I don't know where he puts that experience at 12 years old. It was terrible. And he did the best he could because, again, it's a conflict of loyalty. I mean, he didn't know what to do. He doesn't want to displease anyone. It's just really challenging. Julie, did you want to add anything?
I can underscore the challenge of it. And I think the older they are, with 12 being kind of the I would consider 12 older, because they're in the tween years, they also have an opinion that's not necessarily based on who they want to stay with, but based on what can I get away with. So, I know a lot of, households here in New York City where, the visitation is cut and dried. It's going to be 3 days at dad's apartment, the week at mom's apartment, but the kid doesn't want to go to doesn't want to go to dad's because mom's away on those weekends. And so the kid wants to be at mom's house so that, they have the whole house to themselves and they can kind of do what they want. And the older they get, the more that comes into play, I think, in terms of they want to manipulate the situation. And, I go back always, as you know, Greg, to the importance of listening and open communication, having the kind of relationship with your kid where you can say, what's going on here, and maybe dad's going to feel disappointed that you're not there, or, maybe mom's going to feel disappointed that you're not there. And how can we work this out? Because again, kids begin to have their opinions at a certain point as well.
Sure. Andy, I see you nodding your head. Is there something you wanted to add?
Yeah. The one thing I would add, and I'm a big advocate, and it's discussed in my book, of introducing a family therapist with the children. And not only that, there's a structure by the optimal way to do this, and we bring in a respected family therapist from California who had some excellent tips that are in the book. But the point that is relevant to this discussion today is that, Julie, you are 100% right. Look, kids are kids. And take a teenager that has the opportunity to be in a home without a parent. I mean, my God, it doesn't care who the custodial parent is. They're gonna choose that, and that's a very significant point, and that's an unfair influence not only for the parents but the child. Okay, so if a family therapist is introduced to help the children navigate through their divorce, the family therapist, the child therapist, is the advocate for the children. And what we found is that the children will say things to the therapist that they will not say to the parents.
Yes.
So the therapist can be that conduit to say, here's what little Johnny and Susie need. Okay. And to introduce this, and I've heard with interviewees, I can't afford it, whatever. No, you can't afford not to do it, because the divorce, your divorce, our divorce, if we are the ones getting divorced, is going to upset the lives of the children. And we have enough on our plates, split in one household into two, our own mental stability, our search for new partners, that the children need to have, that we cannot be at the same time the children's therapist. That's not our job. We are the parent. So to introduce an advocate that has no concern about daddy's partner or mommy's partner or how much money anybody makes or what anybody thinks they deserve, that only cares about the well-being of the children, that is one of the most important advice I can leave a parent with, is introduce a child therapist to help your children get through the divorce during those turbulent years. And you feel that you don't need the therapist as much after, don't eliminate the therapist, just reduce the frequency. So as these things arise as the children's age, the children still have that advocate to turn to during situations like this.
Julie, would you say, I mean, I think that's amazing advice. And I also love what you said about, because I feel that way about therapy in general. Like, people can go for a long time, but it's always good to have that person there when a crisis comes up, because invariably it's going to be. I'm wondering, Julie and Andy too, I guess ideally you're never involving the child in any decision around this, but is there a point as they get older that you would ever include them in a discussion about something, certainly maybe not negative, but if it's, I don't know, would you ever, or you just try to avoid that completely, Julie?
Well, okay, so I think it's kind of going to depend a little bit upon what we're talking about, the circumstances and the decision. My belief about parenting in general is that we need to give our children freedom within limits. And when they're little, the limits are pretty tightly prescribed, right? Because they can get into all kinds of bad trouble, dangerous trouble, just because they're exploring their world. But as they grow, we want to expand that freedom for them so that by the time they're teenagers, or young adults, then they have the same freedoms and responsibilities and expectations that any adult has. So what I mean by that in terms of kind of practice is you really move from a more kind of control approach with young kids to a more collaborative approach with older kids. So when you're talking about a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 7, I think they do need to have a say in certain things. If for no other reason, then you can't make a 16-year-old do anything. You can't say, well, too bad your dad's got you this weekend and you're going to have to go. No, I don't. I can go stay with my friend Bobby. Are you kidding me? So you have to have a more collaborative approach. You have to have a more, the kind of relationship where you have discussions, where you make decisions as a family. Now, clearly, obviously, there are going to be certain decisions that you don't let your kid, be part of, like illegal activities. That's just a no across the board. But when it comes to like what they want in terms of seeing one parent to the other, I think it does have to be collaborative.
What do you think, Andy?
There's really very little to add, Julie. Once again, that was perfect. But it's when a children, and in most states, when a child reaches a certain age, the child can demand to live with one home or the other. The perfect situation, I'd say, is you get your spouse in a room, you both read my book, so you're on the same page. Like, listen, we gotta do this together. There's so many case studies that suggest if a child has a better relationship, good relationship with both parents, if both parents are involved in their parenting from divorced households, the child is exponentially more likely to land in a good place. Even on support levels, okay? If one of the spouses is concerned about getting support, statistically, if both parties have fairly similar custodial time with the children, then support is far more likely to be paid. So even from a financial standpoint, there's an incentive for both parents to be active in rearing the children. But of course, this assumes that both parents have landed in good place, do not have dependency issues, and both homes offer safe environments. Assuming that, you want your former spouse to be an active and involved parent. And you really, the perfect answer to your question, Greg, is you want to be in a situation if your children come and say, hey, Dad, I just want to be with you. You want to have the type of relationship where you can sit them down and say, you know what, I get that, but your mom's a great mom. She's done nothing. It's a safe environment. It's not in your best interest to stay just with me. Now, of course, that's in a perfect world, and
Right.
not every parent is going to say that. But that's the relationship you want to have. Ideally, once your children reach an age where they have the ability to say, "This is where I
Right.
want to live." Okay, but there's other points that I discuss in the book. Geographic practicality.
Right.
Your situation, Greg, is a great example. If the biological dad of your eldest son truly wanted to be a part of his life, he needs to stay in town. All right. One of the divorced couples I interviewed, I profiled this in the book, where they split in a city with very high traffic, significant traffic, and the children went with the mom to far outside the city, and the father worked in the center of the city. And initially, he had a reasonable exchange, but then the children's lives were 45 minutes, an hour away. And
Right.
once they got older, whether playing soccer on weekends and hanging out with their friends, going to dad's became an inconvenience. So if you really want to be an involved parent, you both have a responsibility to stay close together geographically to make it easy on your children to enjoy both households. And that's why I do talk about in the book, before you sign your MSA, you need to address geography and come up with a structure that doesn't create a situation where one parent is looking to move, another parent has to consider whether I follow, that you guys have to stay close together if you want to be involved parents until you get these kids out of high school.
Totally agree with that one. So I just want to wrap this up, and I do this to Julie sometimes, and she's like, one thing. I don't know if you have one thing. If you could revisit this conversation that we had and think about, and I'm going to start actually, and think about maybe you can do two, Andy, if you want, but a couple of things maybe that parents need to think about and hold on to if they're going through this process. And for me, I just want to say, and I thought of it because of what you just said, like, it's so hard in these situations that can be so contentious and upsetting and emotional, but that the parent has to make the sacrifice. It's so destructive to the child, and I think you can't see the forest through the trees when you're in the moment. But just that example of you giving, like, hey, the parent has to move closer so the kid's not so disrupted, because all of that trauma, all of that fighting, and believe me, really difficult. It's really challenging. The child just affects everything: self-esteem, sense of self. They're children that will play out for the rest of their lives. So that's what I would say. I love all of these tips, and as difficult as it is, how important that it is that you not make it about yourself and make it about the kids as much as you can, because I think people have been through it, understand. I've seen it in my own family. I've seen it in other families where it's been really bad. It's so destructive to the child and plays out in so many ways, relationally, with esteem, everything. So I guess that would be my one thing. Julie, why don't we finish with Andy since he's our guest? And Julie, what would you say as we wrap up?
I agree with that, Greg, 100%. And I would just add that when you think about being willing to sacrifice, it is about being the bigger person. And as hard as that is in the short term, ultimately, it is so much easier in the long term because everything gets, sorted out over time. And if you can say, as you said, Greg, I'm going to make this sacrifice and I'm going to be the bigger person here, the kids, you're really going to keep the kids out of the middle of that.
Andy?
I'll give you two. One about negotiating a divorce and one about parenting. On negotiating, write down 2, no more than 3 of your primary goals that you have. And you go to your attorney and say, this is what I want to accomplish, compromise everywhere else. What happens in a lot of divorces, because you're so emotionally charged, you lose sight and you lose focus. So force yourself to write down the 2 or 3 things that you want to achieve. And you got to manage your attorneys, not the other way around. You hire a good attorney, say, look, I want this done in 20,000 or 15,000, whatever your budget is or more, but I want to achieve these 2 things. Give him everything else. Give her everything else. Okay. And that will help you conserve funds. And again, it keeps you focused. You write it down. It's on paper. This is my 2 primary goals I want to achieve. In terms of talking about your spouse, okay, once you're divorced, okay, one of the most insightful things in one of the therapists I interviewed, I mean, everybody says don't berate your spouse, okay, or your former spouse. But I've never seen that dissected. And one of the most powerful things that I talk about in the book that I learned myself in a therapist interview is she said, Andy, children have 2 sets of DNA. Biological mom and biological dad. Nothing is going to change that. The child is a 50% byproduct of one parent and a 50% byproduct of the other parent. When you are criticizing your spouse because of the shared DNA, or former spouse, because of the shared DNA, you're in fact criticizing your child. So managing your language and what you say, how you say it, is vital to your child's mental health. Even if it's deserved, you just can't go there. And maybe what you just say is, you know what, Susie, your mom and I, we both love you. We just couldn't function real well together, but I'm just not going to go there.
I couldn't agree more with that one.
That's
I
awesome.
was just thinking something similar. Like, I get the impulse, but if you're tearing down the other parent, you're just tearing down the child. They just feel bad about themselves. They're not going to put that anywhere else but feel bad. And I also just want to reiterate, because I kind of love you. It's kind of stuck with me from the beginning of our conversation that you said, a lot of the people you interviewed didn't know or couldn't remember what their goals were at the start. And that seems like such a, yeah, wait a second. Okay, what do I understand, I'm pissed off, I'm upset, but what do I want? Right? That's so important.
Yeah, and if you clearly define it, if you force yourself to define it, Greg, and you remind yourself, and more importantly, you tell your attorney, whoever's negotiating it, you're going to save money, and it's going to just set a great tone. I mean, you go into your negotiations and you compromise in a bunch of places, and it's going to actually help you because you're compromised in so many places to achieve the couple of things that are really important to you. If I could leave with one more thought, and that is to be patient. I talk about it in my book that divorce is a marathon, not a sprint. So I'll give you a great example of what I mean by that. So let's take a working couple, and the businesswoman's job entails travel. Okay, the husband's job does not. So that creates a situation where the children are used to being alone with dad when mom travels. Mm-hmm. But not the other way around. Mom's involved mom. She wants her 50% custody. She's a great mom. She deserves it. But there's a great example of recognizing the immediate first 6 to 12 months, living with me by myself will be a new phenomenon for the children, but not when they're with dad. So maybe I'll start off with 30% custody, get the kids used to being with me. Therapist says they're doing well. 3 or 4 months, I go to 35%, then 40, then 50. Okay? Be patient. And the key thing is anticipate where your children will have trouble and anticipate what you want. And maybe you're not going to get what you want on day 1, but if you deserve it, you'll get it on day 365. And mom was like, you know what? She sucked it up and said, okay, I know what I want, but what's the best for the children? We'll get to what I want in a manner and a path that takes a bit longer, but in a way that's much better for my children. That was a great story.
It's a great way to end. I think we could all, especially these days, everyone can use a little more patience. I think that's huge. Andy, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to mention again, it's Andy Heller, and the book is Take the High Road, Compassion for Yourself and Your Family. Thanks, Andy. This is a big topic. I hope you'll come back.
I would love to. And I'm also going to say thank you guys for having me. And Julie, you and I never met until today, but your book helped me out. And I am also personally grateful for people like you that create help when people go through a challenge in divorce. So your book was excellent. I loved it. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.